With the release of Thor: Love and Thunder, the character of Jane Foster was brought back into the popular conversation. Not only did Foster make an MCU appearance after years, but she also appeared in a new avatar of Thor, true to her comic book stint as the God of Thunder following Jason Aaron's 2014 run on Thor. While the initial backlash against the character, in both comics and the MCU, was rooted in blatant sexism, Jane has had a polarizing response in the last few years. There are some fans who find her post-Secret Wars run to be a massive improvement, while there are others who have reservations about things like Jane's stories being stretched or Natalie Portman's performance not being up to snuff. A generic personality. Even though she has been a mainstay in Thor comic book storylines for a long time, some readers feel that Jane Foster lacks a concrete personality to make herself stand apart from the rest. As the Redditor VaderGeek puts it, she's incredibly bland, because she had to have such a generic personality that she could be anyone from a secret agent to Thor's mom. However, the same person feels that the one comic where she seems to have more of a distinct personality is All New, All Different Avengers by Mark Waid. Secret Wars improved her run. Many are of the view that Jason Aaron's initial 8-issue run, that included Jane's cancer and her eventual transformation into Thor, was unmemorable, with the new Jane Foster still finding her footing. However, subsequent Marvel comics like Secret Wars and The Mighty Thor are the stories that are considered to have added more depth. It was a pretty bland series that can almost just be entirely skipped since it contributed barely anything to the overall narrative, and felt like treading water for the big reveal right before Secret Wars. Writes Redditor Soul Reaver Dan. In a now-deleted Reddit comment, another user has had a similar opinion. I do think after Secret Wars was when she really found her footing. Handling Thor's character after Jane's transformation. Ever since Jane began wielding Mjolnir, Thor Odinson was depicted as a hero fallen from grace. He just calls himself Odinson and struggles to find his own identity. His sudden status as an unworthy god came off as abrupt and unnecessary for some. So, Jane was developed at the expense of Thor's worthiness. Redditor Skyfire the Robot sums it up: aside from the typical stuff you'd expect, the hate was mostly due to how Thor Odinson was handled for Jane to become Thor. Odinson just suddenly became unworthy in an event comic that wasn't even about him. Natalie Portman's acting. For even the ones who enjoyed the comics, Natalie Portman's performance as Jane Foster was not that satisfactory. Some agreed that the Oscar-winning actress didn't really carry much soul in her performance even before the MCU. Jane was supposed to be Thor. Reddit user Casmosis brought out the fact that Portman is not the best when it comes to franchises like Star Wars and the MCU. Portman is an amazing actress, but she doesn't care at all about some of the stuff she does, or doesn't take it as seriously as her other dramas, Star Wars and MCU specifically, and it's really obvious in her performance. Good emotional conflict. The idea of a cancer-ridden Jane Foster taking the mantle of Thor might seem to be rooted in her motives to survive. However, Thor's powers would only worsen her cancer and reduce her lifespan. And yet Jane continues to hold the powers for the greater good. And this is what makes some readers feel that Jane was indeed a worthy god and a superheroine. To quote Redditor Peppermint Gumbo Drop, Jane was never concerned about whether or not she is worthy. She knew that picking up that hammer would shorten her lifespan, but she did it every time because it was needed. To see her resolves being tested over and over again was fun and powerful. repackaged powers. Even if Jane Foster did get powers, she could have very well gotten a new set of Asgardian powers that brought her out of Thor's shadow. And yet, the comics and the movies decided for her to stick with the same powers of thunder and wielding the Mjolnir that Thor has had for decades. This attempt at just repackaging powers did not sit well for some fans. As Redditor Jon Snow 31391 compares the new Thor with Sam Wilson as the new Captain America in the comic books, I'd rather see new superheroes with different power sets or themes than see existing ones repackaged. There really isn't a lot of uniqueness to Jane Thor. At least with Sam Wilson Cap, he still uses his wings, so you get a different version of Cap. Her initial relationship with MCU Thor was forced before she became Thor in Love and Thunder. Natalie Portman's Jane Foster was introduced as one of the world's leading astrophysicists. And yet, barring a few scenes, she couldn't retain her individuality and was merely reduced to Thor's love interest at times. Even Jane and Thor's relationship in the MCU wasn't seen as very memorable. Reddit has had this issue with her portrayal in the initial phases of the MCU. Redditor Proclamation explains that while she has a few good scenes with fellow scientist Selvig, the relationship with Thor missed the mark. I just felt like she and Thor's relationship was just very artificial. It only existed to serve the hero needs a love interest trope. I remember thinking that it was odd that they had fallen in love after very little meaningful interaction. Best part of Love and Thunder. While many found Taika Waititi's latest Thor outing to be quite disjointed in terms of narrative, others criticized the over-the-top humor. But there were also many audiences who were thankful for the way the movie treated Jane Foster, adding more individuality and depth into her character. As Redditor_BXRIS18 put it simply, I really liked her in the film even if the film left me disappointed. Educational T6572 adds, I thought her character was criminally mishandled in Thor 1 and 2, and also used to think Natalie Portman was poor casting for the character. This movie course-corrected beautifully. Should have retained her own name instead of taking up the mantle of Thor. Fans of the 2010s comic issues are of the mind that Jane Foster could have retained her own name even when she received powers, in the same fashion as Jean Grey and Carol Danvers retaining their names at times instead of their superhero titles. While sure they justify it by making Thor a mantle and the hammer gives the power of Thor, I think the idea of your actual name being attached to the God of Thunder title is cooler. Says Redditor Jason Lee Drake. Sure, just going by Jane Foster may sound silly at first, but in time it can easily become a name that people respect. Jane's absence from the MCU movies, be it as a scientist or a superhero, Jane Foster has been a regular collaborator on many of Thor's missions. Even when they don't share a romantic relationship, she shows up in Thor comics as a crucial character. But that hasn't been the case in the movies, with Jane abruptly breaking up with Thor in the Dark World and then reappearing in Love and Thunder. Even though the latter does offer some explanation, her absence from most of the other MCU movies affected her connection with audiences. My issue with Jane Thor in the MCU is that unlike in the comics, where she had a lengthy history of being alongside Thor as an ally, Jane was absent during pretty much like half of his movies, if not more if we count the crossovers. Says Redditor Kazuya.
With a gentle touch you tell me